meeting of the Standing Committee on Social Development. My name is Gillian Bosman, and I'll be chairing this meeting. I'm just going to ask that members just be reminded of the rules for our virtual engagement. At the start of the meeting, all members will be muted, and only when a member would like to speak, can we ask that member to identify themselves. And if a member or presenter is on the floor, please feel free to put your camera on, but otherwise please turn it off. And also the presenters from the department, if you could also, when you present, you're welcome to turn your cameras on, and you are more than welcome to have the presentation on the screen as well. I'm now going to ask our members to introduce themselves. We'll start with Member Brinkhuis.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. My name is Member Khalil Brinkhuis. Thank you.
Can I go next? Good morning, Chairperson Ricardo Mackenzie.
Good morning, Chairperson Deirdre Bartman. I'm an alternate to this committee. I'm standing in today for Wendy Philander. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Are there any other members that I haven't seen? So don't see any other members. So we have the one apology from Member Wendy Philander, who is in the National Council of Provinces this morning. And then I've also received an apology this morning from the MEC for Social Development, who is tied up in Cabinet. Nomonde, our procedural officer, are there any other apologies?
It's just Member Makamba Boja, Chair. She has tendered an apology.
So we note that apology from Member Makamba Boja. Members will now move on to our guests from the department and everybody else online. If the department can introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chair and honourable members. Robert MacDonald, Head of Department.
Good morning, Honourable Chair and members. Mzondi Lehu, Chief Director, Community and Partnership Development.
Good morning, Juan Smith, here, CFO for the department.
Good morning, members. Debbie Dreyer, Director, Partnership Development.
Good morning, members. Abdul Rauf Raycliffe, also Partnership Development.
Good morning, Lionel Arnolds, Director, Community Development.
Is there anybody else from the department that hasn't been introduced yet?
No, Chair, I think that's everyone for now.
Thank you very much. Members, the purpose of today's meeting is for the department to give us a briefing on how the registration process, the funding and the monitoring, as well as the evaluation works for NPOs in the province. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to the department.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. I'll ask Mr. Hewu to go straight into the first presentation.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Honourable Chair. Can members see the presentation?
I can't see anything on my screen, Mr. Hewu.
Chair, from my side, I can't see anything also on my screen. Thank you.
I can't see anything as well.
None on mine as well, Chairperson.
And now?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet.
There we've got the presentation. If you can just put it
Yeah.
into presentation mode, and then we can go ahead.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Good morning to all honorable members. Chairperson, thank you for the opportunity to invite the Department of Social Development to share with you what we are doing with the registration, compliance, and capacity building. The presentation will be divided into two. I will do the first part with the registration, compliance, and capacity building. My colleague, Charles Jordan, will do later on funding and the monitoring of NGOs. What we are going to talk about is briefly the NPO Act, talk about introducing institutional capacity building, our ICB program, state of the NPO register, the NPO registration and compliance, NPO application online uploads, and then the capacity building and the campaign that we are running, Know Your NPO Status campaign. And my colleague will then take over with the monitoring and the funding of NPOs. Under the NPO Act, the Non-Profit Organization Act number 71 of 1997 came into effect in September 1998. Its enactment followed a lengthy process of policy and legislation reforms, which were negotiated between the state and civil society organizations. The NPO Act hopes to achieve a number of objectives, one being creating an enabling environment for NPOs to flourish, two, setting and maintaining adequate standards of governance, accountability, and transparency, three, creating a voluntary registration facilities for NPOs, which are defined as trust, non-profit companies, and other associations of persons. The Act, Chair, does not speak about non-profit companies. It speaks about companies, but it defines what types of companies. I'm putting emphasis here that the company we're speaking about is a non-profit company. Then the Act further says that the organizations falling within the NPO Act must be established for a public purpose, and their income and property must not be distributed to its members or office bearers, meaning which for the good work that the boards and the office bearers are doing, they cannot be remunerated for that work. However, for the expenses they incur for the day-to-day running of the NPO, they can claim those and be reimbursed thereof. In introducing our capacity building program, the DST program gives effect to the registration of NPOs is the institutional capacity building program. The ICB program is based at head office and it has got 5 staff members. The program is responsible for providing assistance in terms of the NPO registration, as well as compliance in terms of the NPO Act. The program has a provincial designated desk at the contact center that assists in the registration process. The actual registration is done by DST nationally within the NPO Directorate. Our program works in conjunction with community development practitioners, which is the CDPs in our regions, to assist the local NPOs too. The program has a holistic approach that does not solely focus on legislation and compliance, but also addresses organizational development through the extensive training and mentoring programs. That enhances the overall sustainability of the NPO, which is a very important part, because these NPOs as well not only depend on government funding. The program is currently an own service program, meaning which it is not contracted out to NPOs to run. It is operationalized by own staff and in-house, and staff would do so in partnership with other organizations. South African Revenue Service is one of those partners that actually are contributing very well in assisting us here, because they train NPOs on tax issues as well as on how to become a public benefit organization. The state of the NPO register, as of May 2020, nationally we've got 822 NPOs that are registered. And in the Western Cape, we've got 23,492 registered NPOs, which is little more than 10% of the national NPOs in the country. I'll just do a comparison to see how many NPOs have been registered since 2014. Nationally, in 2014, we've got more than 117,000 which were registered. Whereas in 2019, we had more than 209,000 NPOs that have been registered. Out of those that were registered in 2014, 65,658 were non-compliant. And in 2019, out of the 277 NPOs registered, 301 NPOs were non-compliant, meaning about 58% of the NGOs registered in the country are non-compliant, which is more than 50%. More than half of the NGOs registered in our country are non-compliant. What about the Western Cape? In 2014, we had 12,061 NPOs that were registered. In 2019, we had more than 21,388 NGOs that were registered in the Western Cape. Out of those who were registered in 2014, 6,201 of them were non-compliant. And in 2019, 12,910 of them were non-compliant, giving us 60.3% NPOs which are non-compliant in the Western Cape. More than 60% of the NGOs that we've got registered in the Western Cape cannot take advantage of government funding because they are non-compliant. The NPO registration and compliance. Chair, I will show the committee our performance since 2016-17 financial year up to 2019-20 financial year. In 2016-17, we planned to assist and register 660 organizations, and we ended up with 862 organizations. In 2019-20, we planned to assist 798 NPOs. We ended up assisting 1,552 NPOs with registration. The NPO certificate distribution. The NPO desk is responsible for all certificate distribution in the province, and this process has always enjoyed a year-on-year increase. One of the challenges is the delay from the time the organization is registered in Pretoria and the time it takes for the certificates to get to Cape Town in our help desk. Sometimes it takes more than a month for the certificate to reach Cape Town. I will show that graph for honorable members is indicating our performance in the last 4 years. For instance, in 2016, we only distributed 20 certificates. But in 2019, from 20 up to 2019, there's been a dramatic increase. That increase is explained by the next slide. NPOs online uploads. The NPO has migrated a large part of its. That's why we're seeing a big improvement. Since 2018 on the that it was within the benefit line up, and it gives us a turnaround time of 14 days on average per registration. The national DRC turnaround time is 3 to 4 months per registration. This is a big achievement for our team under the management of Abdul Ratcliffe. Well done. It is great work. No other province in the country has. I love honorable member. Honorable members,
Mr. Heu?
I lost the presentation there.
Okay, we're also struggling to hear you. On my side, you're fading in and out. So if you might want to just check your connection, that the presentation is back. Before you continue, if I could just interrupt you. I've just seen that we've got colleagues from the Auditor General's office with us as well, and we should have members of the media. If we could just maybe pause there, and if I could ask the colleagues from the AG's office as well as our colleagues from the media to also please introduce yourselves for the record.
Good morning, members. My name is Tepo Mutomi. Good morning, members. My name is Sikululu Ndamase from the Auditor General's office.
We also have.
Should I continue, honorable member?
We also have member Barnes, who've just joined us, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, member Barnes is struggling to connect, so she is with us. But Mr. Hill, you can continue. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, member. Can you hear me better now, member?
It's not much better at all.
Honorable Chair, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but it's not clearly audible, Mr. Heu. Mr. Heu, are you still there?
I think
Mr. Heu, are you still there? Welcome, Member Bakofos.
Oh, my Lord. Thank you, Chair.
If you could just mute your microphone, please, ma'am.
Okay. Keep the microphone in then.
Do we have Mr. Heu? Colleagues, members, do you mind if we take a quick 5-minute break just to re-establish connection with Mr. Heu?
And you can see the presentation?
We can see you.
Okay, and the presentation too?
We can't see the presentation.
Yeah. You want to disconnect the call? Okay, sure, thanks, bye.
Chair, it seems that the presentation slows down the connection. We'll have to see if it works this time, but it does seem to affect the audio.
Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, I can also share the presentation from my side.
That would be great, Chair.
Okay, let me just
There you
find.
are.
Just have to figure out.
Can you see it now, Chair?
I can't see it yet on my screen. Okay, we can see it now, Mr. Hare.
Okay. Is it from your side, Chair?
No, it's from your side.
It's from my side. Chair, I'm sorry for this technical hiccup. Can you hear me now very clearly, Chair? I've
Yes,
tried
we
to
can.
come closer.
We can hear you loud and clear, sir.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. We're just busy on the NPO online uploads, Chair, where I've indicated that our turnaround times is 14 days compared to national. I think that's where national became jealous, and then everything now did what it did. If I can just go quickly, Chair, in 2018-19, through this online uploads, we have registered 376 NPOs, whereas in 2019-20, we have reached 644 NGOs. We had 9 in progress in 2018, and we have 53 during 2019-20. We rejected 27 during 2018, and then the line rejected 91 during 2019-20. And we canceled 9 during the 2018-19 and only 4 during the last financial year. The total online in 2018 was 403, whereas during 2018-20, we've almost doubled that because we now understood the system and we're more familiar with it. Capacity building. On capacity building, our training focuses on NPO registration and compliance. And we are also training officials so that they can do in-house training and train local NGOs. It's some kind of train-the-trainer program. And we had 36 training sessions that we conducted province-wide, focusing in our rural footprint, like in areas Beaufort West, George, Knysna, Worsley, Oudtshoorn, Vredenburg, Paarl, and of course in the metros. The training is for registered and unregistered organizations, whether they are funded or not by DSD or not. And there are 3 training interventions that we are emphasizing. One is the NPO Act. Secondly, NPO sustainability and the in-house training for the officials. The NPO sustainability is a very important module because it gives the capacity building for NPOs to be able to put together their funding proposals, to be able to put together their fundraising proposals, so that when they are not funded by the government, they are not falling apart, they continue to work. So that module, sustainability module, is a very important module. During 2016-17, In those 3 interventions, we planned to train 420 NPOs, but we ended up training 559. And during 2019-20, we've planned to train 340 NPOs. In those 3 interventions, we ended up training 513, almost double the number. Know Your Status, Know Your NPO Status campaign. During the management of NPOs and the interaction with NPOs nationally, it became clear that some NPOs do not even understand what their status was, whether they comply or they do not comply. And as a result of that, National launched a campaign called Know Your NPO Status campaign. That campaign was launched to make organizations aware about the need to comply with the NPO Act. There is currently a moratorium placed on the registration of the non-compliant NPOs. All NPOs are encouraged to find out their status and then comply. The Western Cape is actively participating in the campaign. The SD head office and regional community development staff have been trained on the campaign so that they can assist the local NPOs to comply. The Know Your Status campaign has been incorporated in the ICB training interventions. So it's part of the methodology, part of the modules that we run. The ICB program during COVID, Chair, I can confirm that we have not closed shop. The NPO help desk is operational during the current crisis. In the current lockdown phase, face-to-face contacts are prohibited, that we know. As a result of that, during the lockdown, we give assistance to NPOs during telephones, during the emails, so that we continue to support our NPOs during the lockdown. There is a drop box at Contact Center for organizations to drop their documents, and our current material is being modified online so that we are able to train online and conduct sessions for the NPOs and the officials without having face-to-face contact. There will be greater use of social media platform in the future, and post the lockdown, the social distances will be incorporated in our training methodology so that we can continue to do what we do. Lastly, these are the details where NPO support is obtainable. NPO help desk, that is the email and that is the number. That is our help desk here locally in the province. There's a drop box which is on the at 9 Wales Street, and also nationally there is a telephone number if you want to interact with the NPO directorate or NPO help desk nationally, or there's also an email where you can also interact and find the support for the NPO nationally. At this point, Chair, I will end and share the presentation so that my colleague Charles can upload the second part of the presentation. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heu. We will just wait for Mr. Jordan then.
Thank you, Mr. Heu. Mr. Jordan, you ready?
Yes, I am. I'm just waiting for Mr. Heu to download.
Okay, I think it's down now. You can upload your end.
Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay. I think Mr. Heu still first needs to close his video call.
Okay, yeah, you can do that. Just check the when you click the share button and then you click the select the screen that you're going to share, it takes a few seconds. There we go. It's
Okay.
on. Thanks, Charles.
Okay, great. Good morning, Honourable Chair and Honourable Members. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. This morning's part of the presentation that I'm going to present is regarding the funding, monitoring and evaluation of the NGOs that the Department of Social Development supports. As part of the introduction, I just would like to say that funding to our non-profit organizations represent a large part of our budget, and specifically social development's budget. And the department contributes significantly to the lives of the poor and vulnerable in the Western Cape through this funding that we provide to the NGOs. In the 1920 financial year, we funded plus minus 2,186 NPOs, and that was part of our process to enhance and promote our policy objectives and priorities within the Western Cape, specifically for the poor and vulnerable people. Our funding of NPOs are implemented in accordance with the department's policy on the funding on non-governmental organizations for the provision of social welfare and community development services. So this policy guides us with various kinds of issues such as criteria, processes, and so forth. The policy was already developed in 2012, but we review it on a regular basis. And we also do consult the NGOs when we do implement this policy or actually review it. On the next slide, just in sort of an overview for 1920 financial year, to give you an indication of the budget that we spend on NPOs. So it is 1.2 billion rand that we spend on transfer budgets for the NPOs. And then I've taken this funding and I've broken it up according to the programs. So our care and services to families, we spend 44 million rand plus minus. Our child and youth care centres, that is the children's homes, is 105 million rand. Child care and protection, we spend 213 million rand. Crime prevention and support, which is like diversion programs for adults and children, is 14 million rand. Our ECDs and partial care is 344 million rand, and that includes the conditional grants from National. Then our poverty alleviation sustainable livelihood programs spend 30 million rand. Our services to our older persons is 248 million rand. And our services to persons with disabilities is 161 million rand. Our substance abuse was 62 million rand. Our victim empowerment is 46 million rand, and our youth development program is 19 million rand. These programs actually include plus minus 350 residential facilities that we fund, from homeless shelters to older persons' homes to disability residential facilities and shelters for abused women and children. If I go to the next slide, it is very important in accordance with our policy to look at the core principles of what we base our funding on. So we allocate our funding provided by the vote of the Provincial Parliament to the NGOs, and it's based on the following. The first and most important one is accountability and transparency. The public funds allocated for addressing social welfare and community development needs will be utilized for its intended purpose in such a manner that we can account for the public and competent statutory bodies. Then appropriate prioritization. Funds will be prioritized on the basis of the types of services based on departmental social and demographic trends analysis and by our research unit, as well as a needs assessment by the department. Capacity building, Mr. Hewitt just did a presentation on capacity building, but by social welfare, we've also got a capacity building component where appropriate capacity building and support will be provided to small and emerging NGOs to render social welfare and community development services in order to develop local capacity. And we specifically focus a lot of time in the non-metro and rural areas with the capacity of NGOs. Continuing with the core principles, we're also looking at efficiency and cost effectiveness, a focus on results that meet the prioritized needs of the citizens as reflected in our annual performance plan, while making the best possible use of the resources we have available and rewarding projects that perform well. We also have a principle of equity, the distribution of resources based on needs and priorities as determined by the mandates and medium-term objectives as defined in the annual performance plan and strategic plan of the department. NGOs shall be given equitable access to bid for funding for social welfare and community development projects. And later on, I will touch a little bit on it. So every 3 years, we actually do a call for proposals where all NGOs, no matter if we fund them or not, can actually apply. And then we do apply a fair process of assessment and allocation of funding on the basis of all these core principles. Also, a very important principle is the professionalism and best practice. Social welfare and community development service shall be rendered in a professional manner by staff of NGOs and DST. A lot of our professions in the NPO must be registered by the South African Council for Social Workers. And then within the ethical framework and governing practices of professional I've mentioned this already, with the South African Council for Social Service Professionals. And then I think also the thing that people sometimes forget, besides being registered as an NPO, a lot of services that's been rendered must also be registered and its legislative requirements, for example, with the Children's Act, the Older Persons Act, the Child Justice Act, the Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse Act. So just to give an example, if you're children's home, a child and youth care center, you can be registered as an NPO, but before we fund you, you must also be registered as a child and youth care center in accordance with the Children's Act. And then also very important is also to look at establishing international best practices. The funding process is the following part of this presentation. Within our available budgetary resources, we fund the provision of statutory social welfare services as prescribed by legislation and approved priority social welfare and community development services to achieve the progressive realization of social service rights pertaining specifically to children, older persons, and any other vulnerable members of society. Our funding process is as follows. The funding process, as I've mentioned, takes place within a 3-year funding cycle. So our next cycle is July 2020, this year, where we will then call proposals for funding from April 2021. Notification of the intent of DSD calling for proposals we do usually via advertising in the media, and we also send circulars out to a lot of the NGOs and also the ones that we're currently contracting. Then we've got a specific business plan and application forms that's submitted to the NGOs, or they can download it from the website, or we can hand it out for them at our local offices, which set out the main cost drivers of each project or service. And all of that business plans then come to one central point at head office in Cape Town. The business plans, the submissions we record and we resubmit it then to the relevant program managers. So every 3 years, we get about easily between 5,000 to 6,000 applications from NGOs in July month to August month when we advertise. And then our managers for older persons or children or disabilities will then start assessing those business plans. And we usually have about only 3 months' time to assess all 6,000 applications. The program managers analyze and assess the business plans and the application forms in terms of our approved eligibility funding criteria. So also important to know that each program's got specific criteria that they place as part of the advertisement. So for example, if we advertise for older persons, we would say we would like organizations that provide residential facility support or lunch clubs or daycare centers for older persons. We would put those kind of criteria, and also where we have gaps. So for example, a specific rural area or a specific area in a metro, we would actually mention that area as well. The current funded organizations, the ones that's currently in our system, they will also be assessed on their current performances from scratch. So they will also have to apply like any other NGO who's not even funded before. Any new organizations that apply and that we consider to fund, we will first do a site visit to look at their capacity. We will look at their financial systems, their governance systems. And for example, if it's a children's home that we've never funded before, we will have to assess every single norms and standard in accordance with the Children Act that they are actually utilizing in that home to satisfy ourselves that they are doing the correct work. The program managers then compile a schedule of all the NGOs that we recommend for funding and those that we are not. So we've got two schedules, about one with 2,100 NGOs that we're funding, and all the others that did not make it or did not qualify or did not meet the criteria also then get on a separate schedule where it's been indicated that they are not successful. They will also then receive letters to indicate their unsuccessfulness. Those funding schedules is then recommended by myself and Mr. Hewe if it's related to his programs. And then also the head of department, Dr. McDonald, also then goes through those schedules and approve it. The funding schedules gets finally approved by the minister. And then, as I've mentioned, successful and unsuccessful NGOs are not notified of their outcomes. So the funding criteria that I've been talking about, what does that include? So the department's executive management approved a while ago, and I think it was 2012 already, the correct criteria. So since our policy was established in 2012, we've also developed funding criteria. And the first and most important thing is to look at the track record of any performance of an NGO in a specific field. So if you're a children's home, for example, we will look at your track record, we will get evidence. And if we're currently funding you, we will look at your current performance as well. We also, if we're currently funding you, we will look at monitoring reports that our monitoring officials have done in the previous financial year. We will also look at any rapid assessments reports that's been done while we were funding you. If you are funded by us as an NGO currently, you've got to submit every quarter a progress report, and that we analyze on a quarterly basis. So we look at those reports as well. And also we do on-site monitoring of NGOs, and those on-site we also look at as part of the funding criteria before we decide to continue funding you. Reports must then be certified by the appropriate manager of that specific program, like the older person's manager. Or in the case, if we do rapid assessments and on-site monitoring and evaluation, then it will be done by the monitoring officers. That then would have to indicate it's a true reflection of the status of the service delivered on site. It is contended that such a certified report provides evidence of track record, indicating also in the report that the MPO is competent and capable of rendering the services. As mentioned, the quarterly progress reports that we look at, even with the current one. So in between, so this is the call for proposals, but every year we still do a desktop assessment of every single NGO that we fund currently, all 2,100. So those quarterly progress reports I've mentioned just now, and those dates of those quarterly reports is in the contract as well, looks at the indication of the following: sound financial systems, is it still in place? Proper management structures and practices. For example, is there a regular AGM meeting? Is there evidence of board meetings? Is there proof of resolutions taken by the board? Then compliance in terms of previous funding criteria we look at. We also look at human resource practices. Is there HR policies in place? Is there training for the staff in place at the MPO? Quarterly, we look at the income and expenditure. So we would like to see the income and then also the expenditure so we can verify that if we do a site visit. And then also evidence that clients, beneficiaries receive the services. So we do get with this progress reports a list of registers of clients, and we do spot checks on those clients as well to see if they really exist or not. I think it's also very important, part of our funding criteria before we fund you, there's also the legislative compliance. So it will be verified by our unit to see if this organization is still registered as a facility or as a non-residential facility. And also the specific program will see if it is still registered. So if I talk about registered as an old age home, for example, have you been registered by this department? Do you have the correct municipal bylaws registration certificates on health and safety, fire clearance, zoning, building plans? So there's a comprehensive package of compliances, legislative compliances that these organizations need to adhere to before we also continue funding such an organization. So the methods of funding, we do various kinds of scenarios that you use when we fund an organization. So it could be that we fund an NPO for a specific project, a project that's got a begin and end date. It could be over a year period. It could be over a 3-year period. The following method that we fund is unit costs. So this unit cost is an indication, for example, let's take once again an old age home. So we divide you according to your health status by a health practitioner and a social worker in an old age home as a category 1, 2, and 3. Category 1, you are very healthy, older person. Category 2, you need some assistance. And category 3, you are a frail person. So each of those categories, we actually attached a unit cost to that. So that is how we fund it. We do it with the shelters, we do it with the child and youth care centers. They all operate according to a unit cost that we fund them. Then we've got on the third bullet, a post funding. This is where we fund specific posts. So for social workers, we fund social work supervisors, social workers, social auxiliary workers in the NGO sector, administrative staff, community development practitioners. In total, we're right now funding about 1,200 posts in the NPO sector alone. Then another process of funding could be seed funding for emergency organizations, or for example, if we start a new shelter, we will do seed funding to furnish furniture like beds and blankets for the facility, furniture and so forth. That's another method of funding. So overall, we've got 4 methods of funding for NPOs. When it comes to and now moving into the monitoring and assistance to NGOs, DSD's line program. So each program, older persons, disability, childcare protection, each one of them have their own team of monitoring and evaluation officials, which includes also social workers. That's full-time just working on monitoring. So the kind of monitoring and evaluation tools that the M&E officials and social workers use is a desktop monitoring that we do annually, and that is specifically usually before we continue funding an organization. We do on-site monitoring, where we've got a specific tool for that. Then we've got a quality assurance tool. That is specifically for NGOs that receive large amounts of money. So this quality assurance tool differs a little bit from the normal monitoring tool, where there's also a self-assessment tool involved. So the NPO will get the opportunity to assess themselves against criteria of funding, governance, norms and standards, health and safety, all of the kinds of requirements as prescribed in an Act 4, for example, an old age home. So they have to assess themselves, then our team will move in, and they will do the assessment, and then the 2 tools will be compared with each other to see what each party has come to, and then where there's gaps or disagreements, it will be discussed with the board of that NPO. Our mentoring and evaluation tool is also in the 3-year cycle. Then we've got rapid assessment tools. So for example, if somebody notifies us that there's potential fraud at an NGO, or we pick up something, then we've got a specific rapid assessment tool that we use to move in to do quick spot checks, followed then by a financial inspection tool. So we've also got a little team amongst the programs that focuses just on the finances of an NGO to see. They look at the books, they pull all the statements, they look at the income expenditure, they look at the slips, the invoices, they tally it, and they usually look at the stuff in quite a lot of detail. And that team specifically will then come up with a report to see if there was fraud or not, or it was mismanagement of money, or it was just money that was not properly recorded, but however in the system. Then we also analyze on a yearly basis every single NPO that we fund, the audit financial statements. So we've got a tool for that we analyze, and that places us in a position to pick up if there's red flags at an NGO or things that the auditor of that NPO have indicated in the audit report. We can look at the financial liquidity of the NGO to see if they are sustainable, are they going to be in trouble, and then to see how we can support them if those kinds of issues comes out of the analysis of the audit financial statements. Part of the monitoring is also that what we do, as I've mentioned, the progress reports before, is submitted on a quarterly databasis. We verify and validate the non-financial data. For example, the register of beneficiaries of each NPO, we've got to validate and verify that. We also then have the contract with us and look at the targets that's been set, the outcomes and activities, and that will be monitored as well. So if the contract says that you've got to render feeding to older persons in a club, then we will check if you actually do the feeding there. We also look at, as I mentioned, your income and expenditure. We look at your audit financial statements. The line programs conduct 100% site visits on an annual basis, and will entail also then specifically looking at the finance and governance monitoring, but also then at the service delivery monitoring. And this is specifically done by registered social workers on the norms and standards. We've also got a little part of capacity building within our line function by social welfare services. If we pick up there is non-compliance, for example, say a children's home's got to have specific programs as indicated by the Children's Act, and we see that they have stopped one of those programs as what the Act requires, then we will identify that as a non-compliance, but we will immediately start assisting the NPO by developing a service improvement delivery plan. We call it usually just a SDIP for short. And then we actually present the service improvement delivery plan to the NPO. And all of this happens in conversation and consultation with the NPO. We don't do it one-sided from our side and say, this is how you must do it and end all. But then we usually also give them a 3 to 6 month period time to then improve on that service or non-compliance issue that we picked up in the organization. We also do a follow-up after a 6 month period to ensure that those stuff that was supposed to be implemented by the NGO, that it's actually now implemented and the quality has improved now. If we do pick up that the NGO needs further capacity building and support, we will then refer it to our capacity building unit. And our capacity building unit assists us specifically with finance and governance. The one thing that I do pick up, a lot of board members, although the passion is there and the heart is there, some of them sometimes do struggle with a little bit of understanding financial processes or reporting. And that's where our capacity building unit then actually start supporting them as well with financial guidance. So the line programs, besides our monitoring evaluation at head office, we also assist the NPOs with the registration of their old age home, the inpatient treatment center, the child and youth care center, the ECD facilities, the after school facilities. No matter if you're funded or unfunded, we will assist you with your registration process. So to give an example, let's take old age homes. We're funding about 117 old age homes, but there's another 182 that is private old age homes or villages with middle and high income groups, and we actually assist them with registration as well. The next point, the registration of service delivery programs at child and youth care centers and ECDs, that we also do. We also assist with the training and registration of carers and ECD educators. We also assist with accurate completion of non-financial data. So if an NGO, specifically it sometimes happens with the ECDs, they struggle sometimes with certain filling in of a report, or they've missed something, and then we actually would assist them to fill it in correctly. If they have not completed their progress reports 100% and left our data, we will phone them back and contact them and say, listen, you've left this out. Do you understand? Must we help you how to fill in that? And we also help them with the contracts. The contracts is a document, the transfer payment agreement, as we call it, is a document that every NGO must sign with a lot of compliance issues in the contracts. We do make a point of explaining in detail to NGOs what the contract entails, What's your targets? What's your outcomes? What's your liabilities? What is your rights as an NPO? How can you appeal about certain issues if you're not satisfied with certain measures? So all of that is in the contract. And then, as I've mentioned, also the head office programs, any new NPO who applies for funding will be assessed by a line program as well. And they are the experts in the legislation. They are the experts that have developed on national task teams legislation, such as the Children's Act or the Older Persons Act. So they know the acts in detail and page by page, and they will assist NPOs. Okay, if you're an old age home, here is legislation you need to comply with. Let us help you to see how you can comply even before we register you. So yeah, Chairperson, that's that in a nutshell. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jordan. Members, we're going to move straight into questions. Can I get an indication if any member would like to start off? I see Member Barnes.
Member Barnes, Chair.
Member Mackenzie.
Member Brankes.
And then Member Brankes. Shall we go with those three? Member Barnes, you may go ahead.
Chair, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My first question will be on registration. If the department can explain what is meant by all funded organizations that are earmarked to be monitored based on cyclical process of 3 years. Does this mean that monitoring takes place once in 3 years? What are the medium to high risk organizations and how are they determined? My second question will be on slide 18, Chair. What is the actual number of monitoring conducted? Is there any work conducted regarding financial compliance of NPOs? And then my last two questions will be on funding, Chair. The first one will be on slide 8. What is the number of applications for funding that were received and how many were unsuccessful? What were the reasons?
Okay.
To make any changes or recommendations to funding schedule, what powers does the MEC have? My last question, Chair. All NGOs recommended for funding. I thank you, Chair.
Member Barnes, I'm not sure if anybody else heard that, but I missed a few chunks of what you were saying. Can I just get an indication from the department whether they heard all of the questions?
Yeah, I lost the last part, the last question, Honourable Chair.
Member Barnes, if you could repeat the last questions just a little bit slower. The connection seemed to have dipped out there.
Okay, Chair. My last question was on slide 9. How many monitoring officers does the department have? Can we be finished with on-site monitoring reports and schedule of all NGOs recommended for funding? That's my last question, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mackenzie?
Thank you, Chairperson. Can I just get an indication on slide number 8? It says here 91 applications were rejected and 4 cancelled. Can we just, I might have missed it, Chairperson. Can we just get the reasons for those rejecting, and does the department provide training for individuals to ensure that they complete the applications correctly? Thank you.
Thank you. Member Brankes?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I would just like to mention to the department that that we support their budget and all the allocations to the various NPOs and NGOs. But many of the NPOs, they are struggling. It is required from an NPO to have a business bank account. And the NPOs, they are struggling to maintain the bank accounts, as banks are charging a lot of money per month for those bank accounts to be maintained. So we would like to urge the department to budget and to allocate money also for NPOs to help them to sustain their bank accounts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Shall we hand over to the department for that first round, and then we'll come back?
Thank you, Chair. The first question on the does monitoring happen once every 3 years? I'll ask Mr. Jordan to assist with that question. I think the second question on whether monitoring is done of financial compliance of NGOs, yes, the monitoring does include looking at compliance with the financial requirements as set out in the agreement that they sign with the department for the transfer of funds. And also there's a reconciliation to make sure that the funds were used for intended purposes. The question on what is the number of applications received, how many were unsuccessful, and what were the reasons? I think we would have to provide that in writing, the numbers and so on. There's going to be a lot of data involved in responding to that question. The question on what powers the MEC has to change recommendations, the MEC wouldn't change any recommendations. The MEC, in terms of the departmental funding policy, is also a decision maker in terms of the final allocations alongside the accounting officer. And so the MEC can disagree with recommendations or request alternative things be considered. But the recommendations wouldn't change. It's just that the MEC may or may not agree with the recommendations. The slide 9, the question of how many monitoring officers the department has. I'll ask Mr. Jordan to see if he can give you a rough figure, but otherwise we'll probably have to answer that in writing as well, because each program office has monitoring officers, and some of them are in Mr. Jordan's chief directorate, some of them are in Mr. Hew's chief directorate. So we'll probably have to come back to you on that. And then also the schedule of NGOs recommended for funding. That is also something we'd have to provide in writing, because it's a few thousand in number. The question from the Honourable Mackenzie, I'll ask Mr. Jordan to assist with that as well. I think he's got the presentation in front of him regarding the 91 NGOs that were cancelled, or their funding was cancelled. And then Honourable Brincase's question around the NPOs that are struggling and because of their bank costs. The department's funding allocations are usually do include a percentage for admin, which enables them to use that for things like the cost of getting a auditor for the audited financial statements, as well as for the management and bookkeeping and so forth. So they can use some of that funding also to assist with their bank costs and so forth. But where NGOs are really battling with liquidity, they do approach us, and we can sometimes assist them with these kinds of things if they are struggling. But generally, administrative costs are built into the funding that we already provide to the NGOs. I'll ask Mr. Jordan to assist with the question about the frequency of monitoring, and I will also ask Mr. Jordan to see if he can assist with the estimated number of monitoring officers, and then finally the question from Honourable Mackenzie, I'll ask him to assist with that. Thanks.
Thank you, HOD. The question from Honourable Mackenzie is actually for Mr. Hever, because that relates to the registration of NPOs.
Okay, thanks. I'll ask Mr. Hayward to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay, honourable members' question on the funding, the monitoring cycle. The monitoring cycle we have indicated as 3 years, so saying that we should at least within 3 years get to the monitoring or the quality assurance tool. So that does not mean that we only look at them every 3 years. So also part of that 3-year cycle would also be your annual assessment, the desktop monitoring. It will be the rapid assessments. It will be the spot checks. But when we implement the quality assurance tool, we should at least do that every 3 years. We have decided on the number of 3 years because of the amount of NPOs. So the NPOs, that quality assurance can take easily up to 5 days just to do, because it's so in depth that it goes, you need about a team of 4 people to look at everything. From the budgets, to the governance, to the daily operations, to the clients, interviewing the clients, all of that. So just to confirm, yeah, we don't monitor them every 3 years. Within a 3-year cycle, we need to do monitoring, rapid assessment, desktop monitoring yearly, all of that. So in one or other way, every single NGO goes through some form of monitoring per year within a 3-year cycle. The question on the number of M&E officials, we have approximately 55 to 57 M&E officials in the department that are being divided between programs. Then I've got another additional 4 staff working just on financial inspections where we have red flags. So approximately we have about 60 officials, which includes monitoring officials and specialized social workers and financial inspectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. Mr. Hayward.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Honorable Chair. The question for Honorable Mackenzie, what are the reasons for rejecting? It's mainly insufficient information, Honorable Mackenzie, because in the help desk we assist organizations to find that information. They come with the information. If the information, they cannot give the information to us within a specified period, then that application will ultimately be rejected. Otherwise, it's mainly because of the insufficient information from the side of the NPO, and we give them the support to provide that information, and then the application goes through. Where the information we don't get until a specified time, then that becomes a rejected application. Mainly that is because of that, but NPOs since 2018 are actually coming on board, actually seeing the value of the assistance that we are giving, and the situation is improving. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Members, shall I open it up for another round of questions?
Yes, please, Chair. I have a follow-up. I have a question that's not answered.
Okay, Member Barnes, what is your follow-up? And then I see Member Baku Force after you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Actually, it's a question that I already asked, but I think maybe I was not audible enough. The question is on slide 8. What is the number of applications for funding that were received and how many were unsuccessful? What were the reasons? If the MEC is allowed to make any changes or recommendations to funding schedule, what powers does the MEC have? That was my question. I thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, I think that question was answered. Mr. McDonald said that they'd be able to provide us with all that information in writing, because it's quite a lot of information. And if I remember correctly, the MEC is part of the decision-making panel, and the MEC can agree and disagree, but the MEC doesn't have any powers to change the decision once it's been made. Mr. McDonald can just correct me if I got that wrong.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the MEC is part of the decision-making process. She wouldn't change the recommendations. The recommendations are made, and then the MEC makes a decision based on the recommendations. And the MEC wouldn't change the schedule either. The schedule is sent through to the MEC for consideration. What the MEC can do, obviously, is ask for clarity or more information on particular things, and also the MEC, once the MEC has made a final decision to agree to a set of allocations, then after that, if there's an appeal process, which involves a separate appeal panel that can then hear an appeal. And if the appeal is not successful, then an organization also has recourse to go to court to ask that the decision be set aside and that their application be considered positively.
Thank you very much. I've got the next question is Member Baku Force.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Member.
Okay, my first question is on slide 5. What constitutes non-compliance, and can you give a breakdown of these non-compliance NPOs per region? I am interested at how many of these are rural areas and working class communities. That's my first question, Chair. And the second question is on slide 9. Given our 60% non-compliance rate in the province, as shown in slide 5, shouldn't the province increase its number and target for these training sessions? In slide 16, can you explain what is meant by all funded organizations are earmarked to be monitored based on a cyclical process of 3 years? Does this mean that monitoring takes place once in 3 years? What are medium to high risk organizations? How are they determined? And the last one, Chair, is on slide 3. In line with the department's needs assessment as outlined in the core principles, are the plans to increase funding for victim empowerment, especially to centers in the working class communities, given the increased cases of GBV in the province? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. Are there any other members with a question for this round?
Yes, Chair. Member Brankish, yeah?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I would just like to get some clarification from the department. If it's permissible for NPO to receive any donations from any foreign sources? Thank you.
Okay. Any other members? Okay. Just a question from me to the department. In terms of the 60% in the province that are not compliant at the moment, does the department have contact with those NPOs? And then how digital is the application for funding in the department, as well as the evaluation process? Is that an online process, or is that still a paper-based process? And then in terms of how the application works, I understand that NPOs apply through the National Department of Social Development, and that the NPO certificate is sent to the province to then hand out. Do we know whether NPOs are sent a notice to say your certificate has arrived at the province, or are they just given that estimate of go and check after a month? And then in the scenario where an NGO is registered by the National Department of Social Development, but that NPO is not getting funding from the department or the Western Cape government in general, to what extent does the department have any monitoring or evaluation role to play in the operations of that department? Thank you, HOD. I'll hand over to you and your team.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the question from the member Baku Baku Force, the slide 5, what constitutes non-compliance? I'll ask Mr. Hewu to assist with that question. Breakdown per region and the how many are rural areas. I think that's something we would have to try and get if we can get it. I'm not sure whether we have access to that info or whether it's only nationally that they have access to that detail. But I'll ask Mr. Hewu to respond on the question of what constitutes non-compliance on slide 5. Thank you. Mr. Hewu,
Thank you,
with us?
HOD.
Okay.
Thank you, HOD. I think mainly what constitutes non-compliance is because the Act specifies that the organizations must do certain things annually, like holding an AGM, electing members of the board, and so on, and then submitting audited financial statements. If any of those items are not complied with, then the NPO is actually regarded as being non-compliant. But I've got my manager here, Mr. Ratcliffe. I want him to go in depth, HOD, through you on why what are other reasons that they would consider an NPO compliance, and then as well as the one on foreign sources. Thanks, HOD. Abdul?
Thanks, Mr. Hewu. That would be in order.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. This is Abdul Rauf Ratcliffe. I manage the ICB program. Just to answer an earlier question around bank accounts, it's a big challenge for NPOs. And we're in contact with our national office all the time around NPO capacity building and registration. And national office have met with banks on several occasions to ask the big banks, the big four, to give better deals for NPOs when it comes to bank charges, etc. So that matter is also being addressed by our national office. In terms of what constitutes non-compliance, there's basically two requirements that the NPO Act has for NGOs in this country. Number one, they have to produce a narrative report, and they have to produce annual financial statements drawn up by an accounting officer. Those are the two requirements, and it must be sent to national within 9 months of the financial year end. Other non-compliance issue is general, like updating of details, making sure that you are doing activities in line with Constitution, etc. But the two biggest items is the narrative report and the annual financial statements, which our office also assists organizations with. In terms of our 60% non-compliance, I think the first thing I need to mention there is that 60% is a huge figure, but one also needs to remember that the NPO register, the actual database, is very, very, very outdated. So a lot of this 60% is probably not alive. They have been dormant or been dead for a number of years. And so the Know Your NPO Status campaign is particularly targeting that aspect to make sure we find out who are still alive and then assist them with registration. In terms of where are they spread in terms of the province, I have the non-compliance list with me of Western Cape, which I'm happy to forward to the meeting. But at the moment, the area with the highest non-compliance is Metro East, which would also, the main area would be Khayelitsha in that area. And as a result, a lot of our training over the last few months have been targeting that area. Just before lockdown, we actually had a massive training in Somerset West with 100 organizations targeting those areas. In terms of foreign funding, yes, a lot of NGOs in this country receive foreign funding. When that happens, obviously other legislation also kicks in. We have our finance forensics people in national that also monitors money coming in. Then also we have SARS that also monitors money coming into the country. But I'm not an expert in that, but I just thought I'd answer that. Yes, a lot of NGOs do get foreign funding. In terms of, do we have contact with the non-compliant organizations? A large part of the contact with the organization is done through the national. Unfortunately, because many organizations have not updated their details, they are also not receiving emails, SMSs, mail from National. And so a lot of the campaign is also done around to tell organizations to get hold of us, update contact details so that we can then invite you to training or invite you to various workshops that are happening. My team is currently have the non-compliant list, and so we try to email and telephone organizations and get them to come to our various venues so that we are able to assist them. So we are in contact with a lot of them, but we also not contact with a lot of them. Or they sent a notice for certificates. So what happens when an organization is registered, they get a standard response from National Office saying that your certificate will be couriered to Cape Town within a specific amount of time, and then they must contact us. What we have found was there's a massive delay, as Mr. Hughes spoke about earlier, from when an organization gets registered and the certificate actually gets delivered. So what happens is our team, as when the certificates gets delivered, we then actually phone organizations ourselves or email them, and then we ask them to collect it. And in terms of our regional offices, we then make sure that we transport those certificates to our regions, and then our community development officials in the regions will then assist to ensure that the organizations collect their certificates. Unfortunately, I need to add that many organizations, they do register for various reasons, and although we phone them to come collect their certificates, sometimes they just refuse to respond to that. Yeah, I think that's it from my side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raycliffe. In terms of the question about the high non-compliance rate and the question of whether a province should increase its targets for assisting NGOs, I think Mr. Raycliffe has already mentioned that a lot of the NGOs that are non-compliant have actually become redundant and they haven't been cleaned off the list yet. It's a similar problem also on the company's databases where you get a lot of outdated information gathering. So that is one of the issues, and you'll see that the number of NPOs has basically doubled in the period that's reported on in the presentation, and I think that's partly due to an equal number closing down, but also I think the reality is that there will always be NPOs opening up. And we strive to support as many as we can, but it's not something that we have a lot of capacity for, because we have to focus on our resources on actually rendering services and monitoring the NGOs that we do partner with. And we do partner with a lot. I mean, we're partnering with 2,200 NGOs. So we have the bulk of our capacity is dedicated to ensuring that the funds that we provide are used correctly, and also then providing support to new and emerging NPOs. But there's a limited extent to which we can do that. Also, I mean, a lot of NGOs are established by people who are quite capable of running their own organizations, and they don't need government's involvement per se. And I think also the NPO directorate at a national level is also assisted by the NDA, which is also involved in capacitating the NPO sector as well. So they do also pick up quite a lot of the work of institutionally supporting NPOs. The question about from Honourable Member Baku Foss about slide 16 and what is meant by the cycle for every 3 years. I think Mr. Jordan mentioned earlier, we have a process where low risk NGOs will monitor every 3 years, once every 3 years. The medium and higher risk ones will monitor more frequently. And some of them will be monitoring twice a year, for example, if they are in trouble. And then it also depends on the nature of the kind of monitoring that we do, because some of the organizations will be monitoring for we're using the standardized monitoring process where we check the financials, we check the HR aspects, we check the norms and standards, where some other organizations we might have to do a more intensive process if they are having challenges with complying with a specific statutory area of service, for example, an old age home where they're not meeting norms and standards, we may have to intervene and work with them quite intensively for a period. The same would apply for a child and youth care centre or a child protection organisation. It varies. So the monitoring, there's a standardised cyclical process of a standard monitoring a set of processes that we do at the minimum once every 3 years to the low risk organizations and more so for the higher risk ones. But then there are other forms of work we do as well, and in terms of monitoring and support that can be more frequent depending on the need. The question about the how digital is our application process for NGO funding. The NGOs can access all of the forms electronically, but the submission is paper-based. The reason being is that a lot of the NGOs don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to the connectivity, or they also necessarily very strong administratively and able to do work in the digital space yet. So it is at the moment paper-based. I think more and more we would like to move to the digital approach where we can, but at the moment it still remains a paper-based process for the submission. But as I say, people can either get the forms in hard copy or they can download the forms for their own purposes and then bring it into the department where it's then received. The benefit also of that is that then you also get everything properly signed and people can get their receipt acknowledged, etc. The last question was if an NPO is registered the Binational as an NPO, but it's not funded by the province. What is the role of the province? But I think you know with that is where we do try to provide the support in terms of registration and compliance with registration conditions. But the province has the supportive role alongside the NDA in that respect. Then there was one question that I didn't answer yet, and that was Honourable Member Baku Foster's question about slide 3, particularly relating to the VEP services. I'll ask Mr. Jordan if he can assist with the response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, OPD. Yes, with regards to VEP services, we have increased quite a few of the funding to VEP services. We're also looking at expanding with another 6 shelters. The National Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister Patricia de Lille, provided the province 6 buildings in rural areas specifically. So we are busy looking at establishing those buildings, well, actually those services, as soon as the buildings are formally transferred to us. We also do support quite a few organizations in the victim empowerment field. But before they can receive any funding, they need to comply with norms and standards. You've got to, at the end of the day, before we can even consider funding you, you've got to have clearance by the municipality. So they need to liaise with municipalities to give them health and safety clearance, fire clearance, zoning clearance, all of those kind of stuff. But when it comes to norms and standards as per legislation or Domestic Violence Act, then those are the kinds of things that we do assist, even if we do not fund you. So yes, in general, there is increases to the VEP field, increase to unit costs that happened in the 1920 financial year, and more expansion to the additional new shelters in the 2021 financial year. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. That is the questions I have, Chair.
Thank you very much, members. As a final round, is there anybody else with a question?
Sorry, Chair. This is Member Barncase. I don't know if I missed the answer on the question that I posed with regard to if it's permissible for NPOs to get foreign donations and foreign assistance and aid. Did I miss that answer?
Yes, you did, sir. Mr. McDonald said that NGOs are welcome to receive foreign donor funding. There's nothing that precludes them from receiving that funding.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Members, are there any other questions?
Yes, Chair. Just two questions I would like to ask. The first one would be, if the department is assisting NPOs in drafting of the business plans. The second one is the funding of youth. Does the funding for youth go entirely to youth cafes?
Thank you. So that will be the last one. And then just one question from Mr. Mackenzie. The question is, where do NGOs access the application form? So is that on the website or where would that be? I'll hand over to you, HOD.
Thanks, Chair. The question on do we assist with drafting a business plan? Yes. Where organizations request assistance and they're unsure of any domains that need to be completed in the business plans, we assist them. The business plan template is provided to them, so they must use that, and we certainly do assist them with that. And then the question of youth funding, does it all go to youth cafes? No, there are other organizations that are also funded for youth programs besides the youth cafes, although the bulk of the funds in the youth program do go to the youth cafes, but there are other things that are funded as well. Yeah, it's a range of different programs for youth development, and then there is also departmental initiatives to assist youth from our own local offices. Some of our offices have youth focal points where young people can come and access computers and get assistance with writing their CVs and so forth at our local offices with the assistance of our own staff. So there's a mixture of NGO-run and department-run youth services. The Honourable Member Mackenzie's question about the forms. The forms are usually available on the website. We put them up when we advertise, and then and call for proposals so that people can download them. I think the only time they're not up is when we update them, and then we have to take them down and replace them with new ones. But otherwise, we do make the forms available for download, or alternatively, people can contact us and then we send them the forms via email. Or give them hard copies of the forms if they don't have access to email.
Thank you very much, Dr. McDonald, and thank you very much to Mr. Heu and Mr. Jordan for providing us with the information. Members, we're now going to excuse the department, and we're going to move on to our resolutions. Dr. McDonald and your team, you're more than welcome to duck out and leave. I know you guys are all very busy, and we are very grateful for the work that you're doing during this lockdown crisis.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the honourable members.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chair and members.
Members, I'm now going to ask if there are any recommendations or resolutions that you have, more resolutions than recommendations. But before I do that, Nomonde, is there any that you noted?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you, through you. The first one is the department must provide the committee with the on-site monitoring reports for the 2019-2020 financial year. Must give the number of unsuccessful applications and reasons per province. So the department must provide the committee with the number of unsuccessful applications and reasons per region. Number of monitoring officers. I think this one was answered, but I don't know whether the members still want it. And the breakdown per region of non-compliant NPOs. Those are the few that I've managed to capture.
Thank you. Members, are there any other resolutions that was not noted there?
Nothing from my side.
Anybody else?
None, Chair.
Nothing from my side, Chair.
Thank you. Namonde, if we could perhaps also ask the department to give us in an Excel spreadsheet this information. So instead of sending us sort of the paper-based version, if they could give us that breakdown in one Excel spreadsheet, if they have, that would be a lot more useful, I think.
Okay, Chair.
Members, is there anything else before we close the recommendation section? Take that as a no. Shall move along. So members, that concludes the recommendations. Our next meeting is the 2nd of June, and that will be a briefing by the Department of Social Development on the Western Cape Laws Repeals Bill, Bill 5 of 2019. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and stay warm. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Thank you, Namonde.
Thanks, Chair.